Okay, so here I have to try and pick up back into Jung. And so this is in the last third of his introduction to Psychology and Alchemy, republished in Murray Stein's Jung on Christianity. And we've been talking about Jung's relationship with Christianity, how he conceives psychology in light of the Christian tradition. And we were talking about the dual strands of the the mainstream church dogma that he feels is connected to the the conscious side, the masculine side, the side of sort of collectivization toward unity. And there's a way that he feels that this is sort of unconsciously compensated through the history of the West with traditions like Gnosticism and alchemy, which express compensating tendencies more to do with that which is not included within the dogma of the church, but which is nevertheless still expressive of our wholeness or totality, namely the feminine, the unconscious, in a sense, the body, evil rather than good, the many rather than one, and also the archetypal qualities associated with numbers 2 and 4, whereas 1 and 3 are expressed within the church tradition. And yes, this is a bit arcane. And just to summarize where we'd gotten to, what I'm trying to do is understand what Jung is talking about and how he conceives of the relevance of alchemy. I did that already so this is going to be like the fourth of 3 videos published already on this topic. And so the request is that someone goes back to those first. And he was talking about how we had this sort of mythological. So again, Jung conceives of history as sort of these big shifts and moves of the psyche and the collective unconscious. And so Jung feels that there was a sort of moment in Babylonian culture when we had the sort of the myth of the Enuma Elish with Tiamat and Marduk, and he feels that this is a shift toward the conscious side of our modern consciousness in some way developed with that mythic shift. And what he felt went along with that shift is a kind of a move toward what he calls the father world. So it's the dominance of these, in a sense, uh, versions of spirituality that emphasize the relationship between father and son. And we see that played out again in the idea of the Holy Ghost sort of coming down to the Virgin. And so the archetypal trend here is for, quote, the higher, the spiritual and the feminine to incline down toward the lower, the earthly and the feminine. Sorry, the higher spiritual and masculine to incline down to the lower earthly and feminine. And this is sort of within the world of the father. And so again, he's talking about these dynamics in the collective unconscious, and he feels that this is a sort of initial move that's made by the conscious half of us in a certain way across a long period of Western history. And he feels that there's been a compensating move that he feels is played out in uh, alchemy and in Gnosticism. And he tries to describe that compensation. And what he talks about is that the quote unquote the world of the mother, which is in some way the earth mother, the void, Mother Earth, Pachamama. How else to express that? It's not the world of the father, that's quite clear. It's the great mother mythology, right? There's an idea that that side also incarnates into the human world. It's the way that the layer of humanity is sort of between the Sky Father and the Earth Mother in a certain way. And when the Sky Father sort of incarnated down into the sun, well, the mother compensates by incarnating up into a different sun. And that sun is described in the tradition of alchemy as the son of the philosophers. And he has sort of compensating qualities. So whereas Christ is in some way unified, this guy is in some way hermaphroditic or dual. And he's chthonic, meaning sort of the underworld. And the idea would be that the Christian tradition would project the Antichrist upon such a figure, although he isn't that. I think that would be the idea. And so I'm going to try and continue with what Jung was saying. I'm going to repeat the last paragraph that we're up to and then continue. He said, this is page 201. This answer of the mother world shows that the gulf between it and the father world is not unbridgeable, seeing that the unconscious holds the seed of the unity of both. Okay, so I guess I would just pause to say that this whole trend is raising gnosis on both sides. So there's a move toward greater consciousness, in a sense, as this progression continues across history. The idea is that this can also be, it was sort of from out of unity. There's a way that the conscious side is always dividing, but it can also be there's a way that sort of as we become more conscious, we can get access to the underlying sense of unity that precedes the differentiations of our conscious side. So there can be both more awareness and the proper balance of discrimination and unification. Because the unconscious holds the seed of the unity of both. Quote, the essence of the conscious mind is discrimination. It must, if it is to be aware of things, separate the opposites and do this contra nature. In nature, the opposites seek one another, the extremes meet, and so it is in the unconscious, particularly in the archetype of unity, the self. Here, as in the deity, the opposites cancel out. But as soon as the unconscious begins to manifest itself, they split asunder, as at the creation. For every act of dawning consciousness is a creative act, and it's from this psychological experience that all our cosmogonic symbols are derived. So he's just saying that there's a way that the unconscious has a unifying quality, and the conscious side of our personality has a discriminating, dividing quality. And that I would also say that to be conscious is to create. I'm going to try to continue here and not get too hung up on the details. He says, and again, here we're trying to understand more of what is the relevance of alchemy in this kind of compensation that he's describing. He says, alchemy is preeminently concerned with the seed of unity, which lies hidden in the chaos of Tiamat, and forms the counterpart to the divine unity. Okay, so the idea here is that alchemy has a particular focus, a particular direction, and that it's sort of toward nature in a certain way. And this is the origins of in a sense, the empirical natural sciences that go toward nature. And the idea is that there is that the unconscious is full of chaos, but there is in some way a seed of unity within it. I need to try and find the image of this. Here is what I mean. Okay. Yeah, so hopefully this can be seen and heard, meaning me. Yeah, so this is the structure that I'm talking about. On the top side is the side of consciousness. We have this 3-in-1 structure, and so alchemy is concerned with this side, the side of the unconscious, the lower side, and there is a core of unity within the chaos of the unconscious, and this is what alchemy is concerned with. Jung says, alchemy is preeminently concerned with the seed of unity, which lies hidden in the chaos of Tiamat and forms the counterpart to the divine unity. Like this, the seed of unity has a Trinitarian character in Christian alchemy and a triadic character in pagan alchemy. So it's the myth of the jewel or the pearl, the treasure hard to attain. Alchemy is concerned with that. He continues, according to other authorities, it corresponds to the unity of the 4 elements and is therefore a quaternity. This, yeah, so there's a way that this, again, the quote from Maria Profetissa is 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, and from the third comes the 1 as the 4th. So there's the way that 1 that is to result from the alchemical process, or again, the sort of, I would say, the combination of Christian alchemical and gnostic strands is there's a way that it is both 1 and 4. The overwhelming majority of modern psychological findings speaks in favor of the latter view, that it's a quaternity rather than a trinity. The few cases I've observed which produced the number 3 were marked by a systematic deficiency in consciousness, that is to say, by an unconsciousness of the inferior function. The number 3 is not a natural expression of wholeness, since 4 represents the minimum number of determinants in a whole judgment. I have to try and explain what he means by this. So he's talking about the way that 4 or quaternity is connected to wholeness. And so he feels that the task of alchemy is to sort of go into the depths of the unconscious and retrieve the 4th, which is designed to, in a sense, restore the wholeness or unity of the whole system. And he feels, again, he said that 4 is the minimum number of determinants in a whole judgment. And this takes from Kant, again, he says, so a judgment, like, for example, that A is B, it requires 4 elements. It requires a subject term, for example, the tree. It requires a predicate term, for example, is tall. And it requires a relation term, as in is or is not. As in the tree is tall. And then it requires a 4th thing, which is a modality or a quality, which is an affirming or negating quality, which is the tree is tall or the tree is not tall. It's kind of like the meaning of it. And all these 4 elements are necessary within a whole judgment. And so Jung feels this is a kind of this is a way of expressing why 4 is expressive of wholeness, whereas 3 is not. He continues, it must nevertheless be stressed that side by side with the distinct leanings of alchemy and of the unconscious towards quaternity, there's always a vacillation between 3 and 4, which comes out over and over again. Even in the axiom of Maria Profetissa, the quaternity is muffled and alembicated, which means subtle or refined. Okay, so there's a way that this 3 and 4 goes together. I won't go on about that. We're going to try and continue here. I want to get through what Jung means. He says, in alchemy, there are 3 as well as 4 regimenta or procedures, 3 as well as 4 colors. There are always 4 elements, but often 3 of them are grouped together with the 4th in a special position, sometimes earth or fire. Okay, so this is simply a way of describing that this problem of 3 and 4, which he talks about in many other places. This is a way that this phrase, from the third comes the one as the 4th. This is kind of the key sticking point. And I've tried to talk about that problem in many different places, and it's very difficult to talk about, but I won't go on about it here. He's simply saying that the 3 and the 4, they go together in this way. Mercurius is, of course, quadratus, square. That's the goal of the alchemical process, or Mercurius. But he's also a 3-headed snake, or triunity. So there's a kind of uncertainty that he's saying is connected to this sort of dual quality of both 3 and 4. He says this uncertainty has a duplex character. In other words, the central idea is ternary, meaning of 3, as well as quaternary, sorry. So this uncertainty of 3 or 4 has a dual character. And I would say that the figure which is supposed to incarnate the Great Mother has this hermaphroditic dual nature, because he is an expression of the duality of 3 and 4. Very difficult to talk about this stuff. It's like, I don't know how anyone is supposed to understand this. I mean, I feel that I do, but why anyone else should is beyond me. Jung says, the psychologist cannot but mention the fact that a similar puzzle exists in the psychology of the unconscious. The least differentiated or inferior function is so much contaminated with the collective unconscious that on becoming conscious, it brings up among others, the archetype of the self as well. Again, so he feels that this sort of matching triangles that I was describing in sort of the history of consciousness, they're sort of matched by the psychological processes within an individual. And he talks about these sort of four functions of, actually, I won't talk about the four functions here, but he calls one sort of superior and one inferior, meaning sort of least developed out of the unconscious. And he feels that when that fourth one is brought up, that it can often bring a whole lot of psychological material with it. And this is in a way equivalent to the way that three is connected with four. Because they seem to be mixed together. It also seems to bring up the archetype of the self a lot. And that's a way that of connecting the self as the one, the unifying. So there's a way that, again, from the third comes the one as the fourth. Yeah, so four signifies the feminine, the motherly, and the physical. Three signifies the masculine, the fatherly, and the spiritual. And thus, the uncertainty as to three or four amounts to a wavering between the spiritual and the physical, which is a striking example of how every human truth is a last truth but one, which means second to last. So I would describe this problem of three and four as a kind of process, which I would describe as a shamanic process of invocation. It's a way of using language to oscillate between the physical and spiritual in a way that can be restorative, in a way that's sort of expressive of the goal of alchemy. I could just sort of be a little bit more explicit and say, again, blah, blah, this is a depiction of an experience. It's a symbol of an experience. And this quote from Maria Profetissa that I've already said sort of opened up and unfolded over the course of a day, like a Zen koan. And it centered on this process that Jung is just describing, this dynamic between three and four, where I sort of realized that this process of which I speak can be enacted. It's something that can be uttered. It's something that can be spoken. It's something that can be fulfilled or expressed. And there's a way of, with language as the third, sort of invoking the logos so as to restore an original sense of wholeness or unity that involves bringing the world into consciousness. So becoming conscious as the world. It's quite difficult to describe. Okay, so I know this part has been super difficult, but if anyone has stuck with this so far, what I'm actually saying is that this alchemical stuff we don't have to understand it literally, we can understand it symbolically. And so what I'm saying is that there's actually a way that this problem of three and four, again, one becomes two, two becomes three, and from the third comes the one as the fourth. That's kind of like a recipe. It's kind of like a magic spell. And there's a way that that can be spoken, it can be demonstrated, it can be shown. And at the moment, I'm trying to explain what I mean by that. And that's actually an impossible task. But there's a very real way that this, again, it happened. And I'm not trying to make more of that than it is. I'm trying to understand the significance of that, and I feel that the significance of that is that it brings up the underlying sense of unity. It restores the wholeness. It from the third comes the one as the fourth. There's a way that that can be spoken, and I feel that well, at the time, the significance of that was sort of obvious. Um, what else do I what else can I say about it? Um, I mean, I think it's something to be to be seen and something to be shown and understood. It's not something to be explained. But I think at the moment, what I noticed is that a huge part of the problem sort of in the world, circa 2025, is all of these splits, all these dual conditions between, men and women, between different people, between ego and unconscious, or between ego and self, or between human and nature. And this sort of recipe is actually a way to restore an underlying sense of unity or wholeness, and that is something that we desperately need. And in that way, I feel that one doesn't need to go and start translating alchemical texts. I can make this very practical and real and um yeah, shareable and hopefully democratizable. I'm hoping that it can be something that can be taught. And I'm trying to investigate how to do that. And so this Jung writing about this alchemical stuff, he's talking about a sort of way to fulfill these sort of gnostic intentions of the purpose of these religious symbols, the symbols of the self. And if we understand that those sort of conscious or sort of institutionalized religious symbols, that they're partial, they express the masculine side, one and three, and that the undercurrents, like alchemy or gnosticism, they express what is not expressed consciously, namely the stuff that's about two and four, and the feminine and the body and the void and so on, and evil as well as good. Well, it's not about sort of say, hey, alchemy is really important or Gnosticism is really important. It's not about that. It's about saying, is there a way that both can be included in an expression that can actively, I mean, like sort of on demand, restore a sense of wholeness or unity that we're missing currently, where there's no way where if that were to happen, it would sort of always be a good thing because whoever would be present would be unified in that. I think I want to actually, I'm particularly talking about it has a shamanic or prophetic quality. It's a way of employing language as the third, the logos. It's a way of invoking the logos to draw everything in a sort of phenomenological way up into aliveness, up into wholeness, in such a way that an underlying sense of unity is disclosed or revealed. And I think I want to leave this here as a separate part. And so I'll come back again.